You're listening to Dave Bantas home recording studio tips and advice as previously heard on KPFK. This is my first quick tip from my studio. I did over 150 shows on KPFK FM. I was raised in the professional studios in Hollywood. I've been working as a full-time engineer for over 25 years. And I started on reel-to-reel in big studios before home recording studios even really existed. This means that I was raised properly on how to label my tracks and set up my gear in a professional way. In fact, if I labeled something incorrectly and I was working at a big professional studio, I would literally get written up and I'd have to sign a typed out paper saying that I wrote the track sheet out wrong, acknowledging that I had screwed up. One of the main problems that I deal with when I deal with a lot of people that do home recording, and while they may get a professional sound, they weren't raised in a professional studio. The main issue that I have when songs are tracked by another engineer in a studio that wasn't raised in a big studio or wasn't trained properly is they don't label their tracks properly. And when you don't label your tracks and your arrangements and all that properly up front, then it causes a great deal of grief later, both for you and especially for the mixing engineer. In fact, when I see tracks come to me that are unlabeled, the first thing that I assume is either this engineer has never worked in a professional studio or he just doesn't care enough to take 2 seconds to label something. Either way, it's a bad blot on you. There's 4 or 5 tips right here I'm going to give you on titling and labeling your projects that will help you immensely look professional and relieve a lot of your stress during your sessions. 3 reasons why you should be labeling your projects properly. Engineers that work in big studios are required to label things properly and professionally. When I was raised in a big studio before computers were even really out and before home studios were ever heard of, I had to label things properly when I was a staff engineer at big studios. If I didn't, I would literally get written up. They would type out a piece of paper that said, "You did not label this correctly," and then I would have to sign that. If you did that enough times, you would lose your job. The problem that I have with so many home studios is when things come to me to be mixed, the main number one problem that I have is engineers that were never raised in a professional environment don't know how to label their projects and files correctly. For people that work in big studios, we never assume that a project is going to go from start to finish at one studio. Major record labels and major artists will bounce around and oftentimes use different engineers in different studios for different projects and different sounds. One of the reasons you need to label your stuff properly is if it comes to someone to be mixed professionally, you're not going to look very good. When tracks come to me to be mixed and they haven't been labeled properly, I either assume that the recording engineer that recorded has never worked in a professional environment, or he's just too lazy to take 2 seconds to label something to make everyone's life easier. Either way, it's a black spot on you and you don't want that. Okay, here's tips on labeling your project. Name your arrangement, your mixed, WAV, AIF, and MP3 files, and the CD that you burn with the name, the time, and the date. So if we look over here in my Cubase session, here's a session I made for this little demo. Whenever I save a project, I label it with the name of the song. This is audio for labeling like a pro, and then I time and date it. Then what I do when I export a mix for someone to take home and listen to, I'll just, I save this like every hour or so. I'll save it as a new arrangement, 9:30, 10, 10:30, 11, and I'll label them all with the time. And when I make a mix to send people home with to send people home to listen to, I actually copy the name of the arrangement with the time and date, and then I save it, and when I export my mix as a stereo mix for them to listen to at home, I'll label it with the same name. So when I export my mix, the WAV and the AIF or the MP3 will be labeled with time and date. There's several reasons that I do that. One of the main reasons that I do that, in Cubase, you can actually copy and paste entire settings on a channel. For example, here's my Cubase. Let's say that this person took home a mix that was labeled with the time and date, and then 3 weeks later they come to me and they say, hey, I really like the vocal sound on October 3rd at 9:30 a.m. I can go back and open October 3rd at 9:30 a.m. And in Cubase and many other programs, I can actually save the entire channel strip, or several channel strips. Like if there are 3 or 4 vocals that are really sounding good, I can open that old arrangement. I can right click and I can go save selected channels, and I could label it. And then I can go to my most recent arrangement and I can paste those settings on the vocals or whatever instrument is on my new arrangement. The second tip for labeling is label tracks before you record, because then the software will auto-name the files. For example, if I record on this track here labeled audio 1 without labeling it, the file that records on that track will be labeled audio 1, and if I record a second file, it will be labeled audio 01, 02. And then you start getting tons of files that are not labeled properly, and it becomes stressful for a mixing engineer to have to look at a lot of tracks and files with none of them labeled. And when you label it before you record, it auto labels and you save yourself literally hundreds of labeling time. So if I hit record on this channel right here, it's going to auto label it audio 01, which you don't want. And then when I look in my folder or my pool window and I look and they're all labeled audio 1, that's bad. That's just bad. That's just unprofessional. And then when you record a second file on the same track, it's also going to auto name that audio 01, 02, and now you start getting hundreds of files that are mislabeled. But if you were just to label it properly, like vocal lead, when I record it, then it's going to name it properly. See, it's saying vocal lead 02 because I just recorded in 01. But now when you go into your pool window or your folder, you'll see that it's actually labeling them properly. That's just professional, and it relieves a huge amount of stress. Let's look at the next quick labeling tip. Label by instrument name first, followed by the description. If I were recording a guitar, an acoustic guitar, or an electric guitar, I would label it by the instrument first, followed by the description. Like vocal lead, vocal backup, guitar electric, guitar acoustic. There's a reason that I do that, and I'll show you really quickly here. If I record on these 2 channels that are labeled guitar electric and guitar acoustic, and I click record, it's going to label those tracks and files the same, guitar electric, guitar acoustic. And when you go into your pool or your folder where all of your music is, and you sort by alphabetical order, then all the guitars show up together, all the vocals show up together, all the ones that are labeled like that will show up in alphabetical order. That's really important to do that. Otherwise, when you're scrolling through a list looking for acoustic guitar or whatever and you don't know, it's just really a problem. There's one really, really, really important thing that a mixing engineer or another engineer is going to need. They're going to need the BPM, beats per minute, or they're going to need the tempo, it's called in Pro Tools. BPM, or beats per minute, is a lot like counting your heart. How many times does your heart beat per minute? The music does the same thing. Like a typical march, da, 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 is 120 beats per minute. Or the tempo in Pro Tools will say 120 beats per minute, 120 BPM. It's really, really, really important that a mixing engineer has the BPM, because it'll take him a few minutes to figure it out. And if he needs to copy and paste things, like if he wants to copy chorus 1 to chorus 2, just real simple like this, copy and move it by bars. That way they'll be accurately on time. If the engineer has a BPM, he can just highlight bars. You see up here, bar 3, bar 4. I can copy bar 3 to bar 4, and I can copy it over to bar 7. And now it's actually in time with the song. So for an engineer to edit the vocals, he's going to need the BPM. And another reason is the effects, like an echo, hello, 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 hello. Oftentimes the engineer wants the effects, like a slap delay or an echo, to actually be in time with the song. And a lot of software plugins do that, where you just click a button that says sync to tempo. So you need a tempo for two reasons. You need it to be able to do editing, and you need it for doing your effects. That right there is a couple of tips that will, if you'll follow, will for sure help me. And I'm going to send this video to several engineers that often send me things unlabeled. So here's your list, your tips. My name is Dave Banta. You can find more videos at youtube.com/home recording lessons. And my personal YouTube is youtube.com/LP producer. L like in long, P like in play, producer, LP producer. You can find me on Facebook at dave.banta, DAVE.BANTA, and come to my website. You can find all my contact information on my website at www.multiplatinums.com. Thank you for listening to my show. If you'd like to be made aware of all future shows, we'll be doing several free videos a week on tips and radio shows on home recording. Just go visit our website and sign up for our email right there, www.multiplatinums.com.